Part. Having known the why and hows of the net zeros and what TCFT did, this is where more of the conceptual questions now start being asked, which is what are the types of climate risk? Now let's begin with the first one, which is physical risk. So physical risk primarily arises from literally the physical climate and the weather impacts that result from the changing climate. Now, what you need to understand here is the most important point, which is they result from hazards that are usually subdivided into acute and chronic hazards. Now, what are these acute and chronic hazards? You sort of now need to connect it to the weather and climate concept that you read in chapter one. It's there are all of these things are interconnected. So acute risk is that one time weather related incident which is sort of exacerbated by climate change, which is things like little event based things like floods, cyclones, and droughts. Then you have chronic risk, which is something which happens over a longer period of time. Again, as you see, now you're moving away from the concept of a weather more towards climate. Here, now you're looking at temperature risk, sea level rise, in terms of the larger aspects of water stress within the land areas also. So this is the primary difference, again, connecting back to the concept in chapter one between acute and chronic risk. Now, what is transition risk? Very clearly, sort of as a mental hook for all of you to remember, you have transition risk, which is associated with the risk in the economic transition or transformation, which leads to different cascade effects on the assets being sort of depleted or becoming stranded assets. That's the main concept that you've read about. Or eventually different policy or tech actions also, which are happening, which are reducing the possibilities of traditional technology and energy systems to sustain themselves. So it is a more, I would say, a multiple order and a systemic concept once you start coming to transition risk, where the physical risk aspect, as the name says, becomes literally the physical aspect. Now, what are the drivers of transition risk? There are many, and these are the types of transition risk that we'll ultimately cover. So it could be policy change, it could be regulatory changes, it could be technology changes, and we'll read about this, right? Despite not reducing subsidies on the renewable aspects of photovoltaic cells and EV batteries, the technology itself is improving by so much that now you don't need those subsidies in many ways, and the prices are falling down. And then, of course, we as consumers always creating pressure points, asking for more and more sustainable, healthier products. But now, when you sort of understand the larger aspect of physical and transition risk, one important point over here is that for both these kind of risks to manifest, hazards or the driving factors, so you look at physical hazards and driving factors for transition risk, are not alone. You need to look at them now from the perspective of exposure and vulnerability. Now, often a lot of us do get confused between hazards, exposures, and vulnerabilities. So I've put in a few examples. We'll get to it after this slide. But I wanted to quickly cover a concept which is there, by the way, in the ebook. So for those of you who have not yet read the ebook but are probably reading other things, there are a few videos which come in between the ebook in certain sections. And this was one of the brief 3 to 4 minute video that I found was very interesting, where Ben over here was talking about specific aspects of how different sectors are affected in a very different way. So now let me bring up the three main sectors here, which was talked about, right? One was agriculture, one was real estate and tourism. And in fact, in a lot of your examples that you'll see across the book, these sectors keep on coming up again and again. Agriculture primarily from the cascade effect that it has on inflation in general. With those of you who are economists or follow that space in general, you'll realize that, for example, food inflation in India has a very high component on the consumer price index, right? So the ripple effect is very huge. Same thing with real estate, because it's literally so much of real estate is present in those coastal areas. Those event-based floodings and incidents which happen has a very immediate impact on real estate as compared to other industries which might face the risk in a decadal basis. And then, of course, for the same reason, tourism, a lot of it which is connected to coral reefs in general, directly affecting the tourism revenues in many ways. So this section again sets that very good context of a few sectors that you need to think of it that way, in terms of which are more affected by physical risk. When we are covering transition risk, you'll also get a view on few sectors which are typical ones to be affected even more on transition risk. So we'll cover that over there.